Good afternoon, Campbell McCreary here, Amvest Capital in New York. Welcome to the Amvest Capital Inc. live webinar with Sun Metals Corp. Sun trades on the venture is SUNM, Sierra, Utah, Nevada, Mike, and SMTTF on the OTC, Sierra, Mike, Tango, Tango, Foxtrot. Do hope you'll enjoy today's webinar. It will be available in replay mode shortly after this live event. Do feel free to chat in your questions in the question pane of the GoToWebinar control panel, or simply email your questions in and we will ask them in real time. Amvest is a New York-based specialist investment management and corporate finance firm focused solely on the natural resource sector. This call is hosted and recorded by Amvest Capital. Our disclaimer, among many things, this call is most definitely for informational purposes only. We're very pleased to have with us today Dr. Mark O'Day, who will discuss the company and the recently announced merger with Serengeti Resources. Mark is a geologist by background and is a mining industry entrepreneur and deal maker. He has built and financed international mining companies from Canada to Africa. He's most recently the PDAC 2021 Viola R. McMillan Award recipient for building and financing several international mining companies, taking them from exploration and discovery to development and operations, including Frontier Gold sale to Newmont, True Gold sale to Endeavor Mining, and Aurora Energy sold to RNC Minerals and Paladin Energy. He is also the founder of Oxygen Capital Corp. Current names in that portfolio include Pure Gold, which recently announced first pour, Liberty Gold, Discovery Metals, and of course, Sun Metals. Thank you very much. Mark, if you want to pull it on your webcam, tell us the exciting new news.
Excellent. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we can see you.
I'm visible. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Campbell, and welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. About 6 months ago, we saw an opportunity to put two companies together to create a diversified copper gold developer, explorer in a tier 1 jurisdiction. So today I want to talk to you about the merger between Sun Metals and Serengeti that we announced just before Christmas, and really the opportunity it creates for exposure to high-grade copper gold in BC. A little bit about BC. I'm not sure how many of you are following the BC exploration space. I've looked at the list of attendees, and I'm obviously a lot of you are. Our province is heating up. A lot of the big boys are moving into BC, getting positioned ahead of a strong and hopefully long-lived copper market. The likes of Newcrest, world leaders in underground block caving, who've recently purchased and are developing the Red Chris underground component. The Newmont have taken a big position, I think a 14 or 15% interest in GT Gold. That's pretty interesting. South 32 are staking out their own turf. They've staked ground all around us at Sun Metals, amongst other places. In fact, for some of you who don't know, South 32, they're bigger than Teck, right? And speaking of Teck are already a big shareholder in Sun Metals and will be reduced somewhat through the merger, but they're paying attention to what we're doing here as well. So you hear the word synergy a lot in the M&A space. It's a word that gets kicked around, and for the most part, synergy is largely fabricated by bankers who want to justify a deal. That's a bit of a cynical comment, but it's hard to come up with synergies in a lot of deals. In the case of Sun Metals and Serengeti, there really is industrial logic behind this deal. We have multiple projects that are literally touching one another, sharing claim boundaries, creating not only critical mass, but exploration and development efficiencies and synergies. So if you look at, for example, the slide that's in front of you right now on our home slide, this is the outcropping, discovery outcrop at Sun Metals Stardust deposit, a high-grade copper gold system, massive sulfide system, and just down in the valley, right next door, literally, is the Kwanika deposit owned by Serengeti. So we share that claim boundary. So there's so much logic to this deal, creating a combined development platform here with this as the anchor asset. Next few slides, we're going to make some forward-looking statements here, make sure that's known. Next slide, please. So really this map brings it all to life and shows what's being brought to the table on a combined basis in BC. So we're looking at a stretch of one of the most prolific copper gold porphyry belts in Canada. And you know, it's peppered with big tonnage deposits all the way up and down the spine of the system. We are now creating a whole series of centers of gravity up and down it's called the Quesnel terrain and the Stikine terrain through this merger. So Sun Metals, from a Sun Metals perspective, we're going from effectively a single asset company to now a diversified multi-asset copper gold developer explorer with multiple opportunities here. The key or the backstop of this whole deal is at the bottom of your page there at the Stardust Kwanika combined footprint. That really ring fences a little over 2 billion pounds of copper, roughly 2.5 million ounces of gold, and I think around 10 million ounces of silver. So really that's the backstop of value, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail in a few minutes. And we see that on a combined basis as a project that can move into, with a little more drilling and engineering work, etc., into a development stage in its evolution. A little bit to the north, 40 kilometers to the north, there's another combined footprint that this combination brings to the table for the very first time. The Lorraine and Topcat projects are now consolidated for the first time, which brings all kinds of synergies and efficiencies to that system up there. And I'll talk a bit about that in a little while as well. And then finally, East Niv, we've got some other projects around it, but East Niv is the third center of gravity in this deal that we are really excited about. There's a brand new undrilled copper gold porphyry system daylighting there, sticking out of the ground, that the Serengeti team have brought to the table over the last couple of years. It's well located just to the south of Kamess, just off that power line road. And we plan on stepping in there this summer and drilling it for the first time and hopefully bring a new discovery to life. So let's work our way through this new portfolio and this new pipeline one by one. So let's start at Stardust and Kwanika. As I said, this is really the backstop of the whole deal. It's the fundamental underpinning of the value here. There's a project footprint map you can see on the right-hand side there, just to show how close these two projects actually are together. They're about 4 or 5 kilometers apart. You can see them from the home page that we pointed out on top of the hill at Stardust. You can look down into the valley at Kwanika. And what we're bringing together here is the Kwanika open pit, shown in pink. This is a project that is sort of just on the cusp of a PFS stage exercise. So it's gone through PEA. It's just on the cusp of a PFS. So a lot of work's been done there. There's an open pit component of Kwanika. There's an underground component of Kwanika in the form of a block cave. You've got the Stardust Canyon Creek zone, and you've got the Stardust 421 zone, which is Sun Metals' newest discovery that we made 2.5 years ago, all coming together in a centralized processing facility, a centralized footprint that we would envision being developed concurrently. And with that, all kinds of synergies and efficiencies emerge. Streamlined permitting, achieving critical scale, focusing on higher grade components of each system to really optimize cash flow and reduce capital intensity. So one of the things that gets me really excited about these two projects on a combined basis is the focus on grade. So on the next slide, when people think about copper gold systems, they inevitably think about the lower grade copper gold, big tonnage, lower grade copper gold porphyries scattered around BC, and in fact all the way up and down the Cordillera. And typically speaking, 0.3% copper is sort of mainstream, sort of benchmark levels for what would be considered, economic, with some gold and other credits thrown in there. And what we're looking at Stardust on the right-hand side here is a system that is an order of magnitude higher grade. So this is a system that the team at Stardust really pinned down and made the fundamental step change discovery on, called the 421 zone, when they drilled 100 meters of just over 6% copper equivalent. It was a game changer for the whole system. It was the drill hole that, in talking with Teck, they agreed to come in and buy 10% of the company. They became a big supportive shareholder of this. And over the last couple of years, the team has systematically stepped out from that drill hole in a very methodical way and built continuity up and down plunge. So we now have a continuous mineralized system or deposit from surface all the way down to 900 meters and growing. The system's wide open. It's not closed off by any faulting, and we think we're going to find more as we continue to explore and ultimately get underground here. But the system from a tenor perspective is characterized by roughly 3% copper equivalent. So it is a very high grade, very valuable chunk of rock. Right next door at Kwanika, you've got a 200 to 300 million ton copper gold porphyry that's running 0.2 to 0.25 copper and sort of similar levels of gold. But within it, what gets us excited and what gets me really interested in this deal is that within it is a much higher grade domain that we think warrants further delineation and better understanding to figure out its ultimate geometry, its ultimate size, how it all hangs together, and how we can mine this thing from both an open pit and a block cave perspective. And I say high grade with an illustration here on this left-hand side of some drill holes that are all out in the public domain. And you can see for yourself, I mean, 500 meters of 0.66 copper and 0.8 gold, 514 meters of 0.64 copper and 0.8 gold, 438 meters of 0.71 copper and 0.83 gold. Even on a copper grade basis alone, this component of the project would rank amongst the highest copper grades of any project in BC. Porphyry, right? And you throw in the gold credits on top of that, this is truly a high grade copper gold, alkalic copper gold system. So on a combined basis, we think the high grade from Stardust and the critical mass plus grade at Kwanika paint a pretty clear path forward. And so over the course of the next year, we're going to try and get to delineate that path through additional drilling, engineering work, and ultimately come out the other end, maybe early 2022, with a PEA that scopes out a path forward on a combined development plan between these two projects. Next slide. So moving to the north, 40 kilometers to the north, is a project called Lorraine that Sun Metals brought to the table, and Top Cat, which surrounds Lorraine, that Serengeti brought to the table. And so we're putting together for the first time a 70,000 hectare massive portfolio, massive property footprint here that's characterized by a whole series of high grade alkalic copper gold porphyry centers. What's interesting about this, aside from the grade, which we'll talk about a little bit here on this chart, is that Lorraine has been sort of tucked away within Teck for the last 10 or 12 years. They had earned a 51% interest in it, and it sort of sat dormant in their portfolio until very, very recently, when the team at Sun Metals reached out and struck a deal to consolidate 100% ownership of Lorraine in Sun. So now on a combined basis with the merger with Serengeti, we will have 100% interest in this big, broader portfolio. And within it, Teck focused on a couple of showings called the Bishop, the Upper Main, the Lower Main, and a few others, drilled a whole series of holes that generated some pretty spectacular copper gold grades. But we see an opportunity to expand that footprint, make further discoveries, and test a whole bunch of additional targets that haven't been tested yet. So we think this has all of the merit to be a standalone, 50 to 100 million ton type system that is only 40 kilometers away from the ultimate center of gravity of what we are putting together here, which is Kwanika and Stardust. But if you look, just to point out some of the high grades that have been hit here, this is a high grade system that returned multiple holes of 100 plus meters of, you know, in some cases well over 1% copper and a half gram gold. There's a small resource here. It's an incipient resource. It's by no means should be viewed as characterizing the potential of this project. But there's a small resource here, a historical resource of about 30 million tons that stands out when you actually stack it up next to all of the other porphyry copper gold resources in BC as one of the highest copper grades out there, which is pretty interesting from a place to start here. So we're going to be doing a lot of work here this summer, compiling data, getting this ready for a full-blown drill program that'll either start this summer or in 2022 summer. So moving on to the next property that we're very excited about, and we'll have budget allocated to it this summer, is called East Niv. It's the earliest stage project in our pipeline. It's never been drilled before. It's got several zones that are outcropping that, you know, over hundreds of meters of good copper gold grades at surface, sitting within a geophysical anomaly, sitting within a geochemical anomaly, well located just to the south of Kemess, next to the power road, power corridor there. And so, you know, we're in an enviable position to be the, you know, the pro forma company that goes and drills this asset for the very first time this summer. And if a discovery is made through the drill bit that supports the surface results that the Serengeti team have been getting over the past 2 years, then we're way at the races here with a legitimate discovery that will generate, I think, a huge amount of interest. Next slide, please. So in terms of timelines over the next year, catalyst, it's going to be a very, very catalyst-rich year. Lots of milestones being hit, starting with the closing of this merger at the 5th of March, roughly. So we're a little over, I guess, a month and a bit out, 2 months out from that. And that'll be followed up immediately with, in Q1, a first ever resource estimate on the 421 zone combined with the overall Stardust project. We'll come out with a new holistic resource for that project. We're going to initiate drilling on Kwanika. We're going to initiate our field program at East Niv and at Lorraine, followed by our drill test at East Niv, a published resource at Kwanika that'll update the high-grade component that I talked about, and all of that, you know, culminating in an ultimate PEA at the end of the year or early 2022 on Sun Metals, on Stardust and Kwanika, with drill results sort of peppered throughout that whole timeline as soon as we start drilling. So it's going to be an incredibly active year. And, you know, from Sun Metals' perspective, we're going from, you know, effectively a single asset company with one focus to a much richer, more diversified opportunity here to create value and momentum from multiple centers through success. Next slide, please. In terms of what the capital structure is going to look like at the end of this deal, we're rolling back the stock. So just to back up here, so Serengeti is acquiring Sun Metals through a share exchange that has a ratio of 0.43. Post-consolidation, Serengeti is going to, post share exchange, Serengeti will roll back its stock 2-to-1. So, I mean, nobody loses any value in that rollback. This is simply a mechanical thing to tighten up the share structure. Serengeti's trading at 40 cents today. That means on closing, it'll be trading at 80 cents and have 117 million shares outstanding. We're raising $10.4 million. We should start life out net of fees and change of control provisions and things like that with somewhere around $8 million in the treasury, which is a healthy balance to start initiating our program on a bunch of these initiatives that I just took you through. So I'm very excited about this deal. I think it really does make great logical sense. It provides both companies with a much broader, more exciting portfolio and we each enhance each other's portfolio through a bunch of different mechanisms. The team is going to be comprised of 6 board members, 3 from each side, so 3 from the Sun side, 3 from the Serengeti side, so it really is being viewed as a merger here. I've stepped in as executive chairman. Dave's the interim CEO. We expect to have a new CEO on a permanent CEO in place, around the time of the closing of this deal. And we're looking to enhance a few key positions within the technical side through hiring of a chief geologist, etc. But the team's there, and the company is going to start life out with a much tighter structure, a much broader focus, with an opportunity to really generate value in multiple places, and sort of a whole new lease on life, really. It'll come out with a new name and a new sort of narrative. This is obviously the first iteration of what that looks like, and as we get going on all these initiatives and project initiatives, this presentation will go through multiple generations. Next slide. So that about sums it up, why we're doing the deal, why we're excited about it, and sort of the opportunities that I think it opens up for shareholders on both sides and new shareholders coming in. I mean, we're starting life out with a market cap of only about $80 million. So we really do feel like there's an opportunity here to come in at the ground floor here on a pipeline that rivals any other pre-production copper gold explorer developer in BC. So I'll leave it there, Campbell. Thank you for your attention. Thanks for dialing in, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sure, got a bunch that have come in. When are the metallurgical results out for Sun?
So the met work should be out sort of by the end of Q1 is our estimate.
Okay. If Kwanika is at the PFS stage, why do more drilling?
So if you go back to that slide that shows the high grade, we can talk about where that drilling is going to be focused. So I'm most interested in tightening up the drill spacing around the domain that contains, so that's the Stardust side. Let's go to the Kwanika side. Yeah, so I'm more interested in tightening up the drill spacing that defines the higher grade component of this system. We know there's a big, multi-100 million ton copper gold porphyry system here, and growing. It's not closed off, but it's growing, still open, lots of targets to test. But within it, I want us to better constrain that high grade core so we can put some parameters around it and really find out how it hangs together and at what grade. And that's going to require a little bit more drilling.
How have you investigated the geological controls on mineralization? How advanced are you in understanding the structural geology in the area? And any plans regarding these in the coming drill programs?
So I think we've got a pretty good handle on the structural controls on mineralization. I can speak to Stardust more so than Kwanika at this stage, having been more intimately familiar with it. But we've been able to identify the controlling geometry of the high-grade chute that you see there on the right-hand side of your picture. It's in a parasitic fold as part of a regional fold, and that plunge line is effectively parallel to the fold axis, defined by a folded sequence of palitic rocks and massive limestones.
And the new name of the company will be Serengeti, or is there a little twist?
No, so the new name will be, it's still a work in progress. There's going to be a new name generated here before closing the deal.
Okay, great. What does the mineralization look like at Stardust? What ore types do you guys have? What could be the potential mineral processing challenges, since you mentioned Stardust?
Yeah, so that's an in-depth question that I can't get into all of the intricacies of here, but high level, this is a massive sulfide copper gold skarn. It's a skarn system, and it's got all of the sort of skarn related assemblages that you would expect. It's a coarse grained massive sulfide system, which is good from a metallurgical point of view. And our team has done, I think, a pretty excellent job of figuring out the sort of the hydrothermal history, the epigenetic history of mineralization here, when it came in relative to the skarn event, which directions the fluid flowed up through the pathway, why it blew out in the limestones, why it's there. From a processing point of view, it's too early to figure out what a flow sheet would look like. We're just going through phase 1 metallurgy right now and are optimistic that, you know, there won't be any negative surprises there.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to pass this on to to Gabe, excuse me. Gabe?
Sure. Thanks, Campbell. Mark, can you just reiterate for everyone sort of the synergies that you believe are between the two companies and various assets from from when we go to start to look at sort of a further development into production scenarios?
Sure. I mean, the synergies are, I think, pretty clear. If you go to the next slide here, Adrian. Yeah, let's start with this one. So this combined footprint brings, I mean, it's the epitome of synergy where 1 + 1 = 3, right? Where the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And what Stardust brings to the table is what Kwanika is currently lacking, and what Kwanika brings to the table is what Stardust is currently lacking. So we're bringing the high-grade tons from Stardust to the much bigger, more critical mass Kwanika deposit, but lower grade, to create an opportunity that we think works on a combined basis. So that's the synergy here. And, we're not talking about two projects that are 100 kilometers apart. We're talking about a project that you could effectively, throw a rock and hit the next project. We share a claim boundary. We're road accessible to one another. You can see the scale bar there. That's 2 kilometers. You can drive from one project to the other in, I think it's 6 or 8 kilometers or whatever the distance is. This is a project footprint that you would conceivably develop both projects together concurrently as one. And the same, it's earlier stage, but the same is true for the Lorraine Top Cat project. Those are claim boundaries that are shared. It's the same system, right? So you've got a big alkalic copper gold system. These alkalic systems, they form in clusters, and we've got every expectation that the clusters of mineralization we find on Lorraine are going to extend on the Top Cat. So for the first time, these projects are going to be put together under one roof, under one budget. And so there's all kinds of synergies from an exploration point of view, creating efficiencies of scale. So I think that's pretty clear. NIV is a standalone project that Serengeti are bringing to the table. And it in of itself is an exciting greenfields exploration target that we're going to drill for the first time and hopefully demonstrate some success.
That's great. And then in terms of sort of indigenous groups or First Nations groups, you share the same one, and can you talk a little bit about sort of environmental permitting, or like the benefits of having everyone, like all these projects together from an environmental point of view?
Yeah, so one of the nice elements of this deal is that both companies have done a great job building, maintaining, establishing great relationships with the local First Nation groups where their projects are located. And so East NIV, for example, and Kwanika and Stardust all have current active agreements in place with the First Nations in their areas.
Great. In terms of the previous drill program, I guess the 2020 drill program, is there any, or what portion of those core samples are left to be assayed and announced to market?
I believe there's some stragglers hanging out there that I know in the case of Stardust, there were some regional exploration or farther flung exploration targets that were tested. You know, I don't think there's any material news to be expected there, but they're being compiled. And Kwanika, I believe they've got a remaining half dozen or so. I could be wrong on the number.
Are we waiting for those results to be analyzed internally to sort of hit the ground running on using the new funds, or do we already have drill targets defined for the new funds?
No, we've already got drill targets defined. I mean, it's a work in progress, but
Sure.
we don't need. I mean, defining these targets is not going to be an expensive process. So we know exactly what needs to be done here to work up a bunch of drill program targets for this coming year.
Great. Okay. Stu, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Mark. So the financing that Serengeti just completed, that was upsized, obviously due to strong demand. Roughly, you know, what percentage of that was from, you know, new shareholders, new investors into Sun versus, you know, existing investors topping up or staying pro rata?
So from an insider's perspective, I think collectively the insiders of both groups put in about 10% of that allocation, so put in about $1 million. There was a couple of chunky institutions that came in that were new to the story, that came in for reasonable orders, and then a number of institutions that came in for smaller orders, some of whom had already been in the deal previously. And then the rest was, we'll call it retail. And we started out with an $8 million financing. I think the book grew to 13 or 14 million, and we closed it off at 10.4.
Yeah, that's great. And then on the Lorraine acquisition, what were the acquisition terms, and how does the transaction, the merger, impact that, if at all?
So the transaction with Teck is a non-cash deal. So we've got the ability to make payments to Teck in either shares or cash. We would elect to do it in shares, at least at this point. I can't remember the exact terms. It's out in the public market. It's not onerous, and it's staged over 3 or 4 years. Sun Metals was already starting out with a 49% interest in Lorraine. So we had a 49% interest through our acquisition a few years ago of Lorraine Copper. So that gave us a 49% interest in that property package. And we're buying the remaining 51% majority interest from Teck through a series of share payments over a number of years. I can't remember the exact details, to be honest.
Yep, okay. Thanks for that. And then, you know, obviously you have to wait to the shareholder meeting early March, but, you know, roughly, do you have a budget in mind for exploration for 2021 in terms of dollars and meters, and, you know, how would you spread that across your projects?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a work in progress, Stuart. So, you know, I guess suffice it to say, you know, we're going to build a budget around the funds that we have to maximize their impact. So we've got enough working capital now to kind of see our way through this coming year comfortably, and focused on the projects that we think are going to generate, you know, the most important milestones for us. So, you know, I can envision a $2 million program at both Kwanika and NIV, for example.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks. And I mean, looking at the map, this transaction makes a lot of sense. And given they're neighbours, you know, you've obviously known each other for a while. You know, just any indication how long this discussion had been in behind the scenes, behind the works?
Well, we've been friendly ever since we moved into the neighborhood. And so we picked up this project at Sun Metals, I think about 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. And so, you know, we've gotten to know each other over that time period, and, you know, kept an open dialogue, open communication, very cordial and friendly. And I guess it really started heating up about 6 months ago. it became clear that what each side had to offer was beneficial to the other, and so we became more serious in our discussions, and it ultimately culminated in what we announced before Christmas.
Yep, makes sense. Thanks for that, Campbell.
Sure. A few more questions have been sent in. Thank you very much. You're building this obviously to take it to production, but if along the way someone were to take you out, that would be great too. The typical model. What are you envisioning you're building that would be of interest, and what do you think the landscape will look like, in a few years' time? So you're having to sort of anticipate what people will need, and then what would be a profile of a potential acquirer?
Right. I guess, going through my own personal experience in building these companies and transacting on them, we don't have a blueprint in terms of the ultimate destination that we get to, but we do have a roadmap in terms of what needs to be done to do the right thing. And so, if you look back on the history of the group of companies I've been involved with, at Frontier, we sold Frontier at the, not even at the PFS stage, right? But we made a big discovery. It was exciting and it was getting bigger, and there was somebody interested in buying it. At True Gold, at Aurora, we did the same thing. We were at the PFS stage. It wasn't in construction or permitting, but it got acquired. At True Gold, we actually built a mine. So we took a mine from concept to full production and sold it at the end of production. At Pure Gold, we just finished constructing a mine, and now we're working our way through to commercial production. So there's no one blueprint that our companies follow in terms of how we create value for our shareholders. But what we do try and do is much like building a house. If you build a house that you want to live in, you're going to build it well. And if you build a house to flip, then chances are no one's going to want to buy it, right? So we build this as a company that we want to live in and own for the long term, which means we're going to try and do the right thing from the resource definition all the way up through. So get the foundation right, get the social parameters right, and build from there. And ultimately, if we get that part right, then we're going to end up with a company that, short of some exogenous event that destroys metal markets, we should end up with a company that has a legitimate shot at a development project here, right? So we're guided by the fundamental principles of getting the foundation right and building from there.
And could you say it would be a big tier blue chip company that would be interested, or who knows who's the top dog and down the road?
What I can say is that, copper development projects, especially in tier 1 jurisdictions like this, are rare, right? And so there's not a lot to invest in. There's lots in the gold space to pick from these days, but copper is a little more scarce, especially in good places that you know that you're going to own the project when you wake up tomorrow. So I see this. What's appealing to this is that I don't see this as a massive capex type project. I see this as a modest capex kind of bill, which means it's a project that conceivably a single asset company developing it on their own could actually finance. If this were a $1.5 billion capex type project, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. But if this is something that's $500 million or $400 to $600 million, then you can build that yourself. You can finance it yourself. And so I think that this is a portfolio that ought to be attractive to any mid-tier copper producer or greater.
Okay. Shifting to Kwanika, what is the main copper sulfide present in the high grade at Kwanika?
I believe it's chalcopyrite. You know what? whether it's either chalcopyrite or bornite. I'm not sure what the main dominant one is. So I'm sure it varies throughout the deposit.
Would a mill likely situated at one location or the other, or somewhere in between, or too early to know?
It's way too early to know, but it would make sense from a topographic perspective that it would be down on the flats.
Okay. Great question. Will this new combined company be your primary focus? This was part of mine, is of the oxygen group of companies. Is it going to be in the oxygen group or half in the oxygen group? And what will your ownership post transaction financing be?
So it's currently my principal focus right now, and I've found myself with some extra bandwidth. Pure gold had been my focus last year as the mine was getting built, and Darren and I did a lot of targeted marketing around that. And right now my focus is I've got the ability to sort of pivot to this opportunity of coming in as executive chair. I'm committed to getting this right. I'm committed to backing it. And my share position today is somewhere around 10 million shares of Sun Metals.
Okay. How confident are you in being able to execute a larger drill program with the current COVID-19 situation in BC? So the usual COVID-19, what's the bottom line with you there?
The team, I think the teams on both sides of this merger have worked out protocols on the ground to successfully complete the programs that they did this past summer. So that handbook of protocols and best practices around COVID is sort of well trodden by now. And we'll have to gauge what the sort of maximum level of camp size and and space available to figure out what the maximum number of drills we can actually manage in a particular epicenter. But given that we're moving around from project to project, I don't see space as an issue there.
What is the orientation of the high-grade zone at Kwanika?
I don't think it's well enough understood at this point, right? So it's steeply dipping, at least in the places where it's been well drilled, and then beyond that, I think it still needs to be determined.
Okay. And then just in the area, how much, if you could just summarize how much infrastructure is there, roads and power, how much would an upgrade be for those two? What do you imagine? Are you going to have to put any long tunnels or through mountains and is it insurmountable? Your location still remote, as far as I can tell.
It's not as remote as it might look. It's actually there are projects you can actually drive to, right? Mm-hmm. If you had the time to drive there, you drive there. Obviously, we fly in, take a float plane in, and shave off a bunch of ground, a bunch of time. But you can drive to Stardust and Kwanika, right? So infrastructurally, they're pretty darn well suited. From a topographic point of view, you go back to the opening slide, the very cover slide, you get a sense of what the topography is like. So we're not up in the Iskut, we're not up in glacier terrain where you get, incredibly severe winters and topography that's really difficult to deal with. These are, relatively low rolling hills, don't get a lot of snow from BC perspective, and you can drive here. So it's pretty ideally located, actually.
Okay. And then the final question, why buy now? And I'll define now as a two-part question. Understand this isn't quite closing till March, so should investors wait till the final close and the name change? Is there some sort of opportunity there? And then just in the next tomorrow, in the next next month, 2 months. Why buy now? Fundamentally.
Right. Well, look, I can't give investment advice.
No, you can't.
No.
But
So I can't answer it that way. I can say what I did. I mean, I bought 2 million more shares of the deal as part of the $10 million financing. I participated in that because I see this pipeline, this portfolio generating a much stronger company than either one is on their own. I see the cost of entry being very compelling. I'm looking at what copper's doing. And if we're at the beginning of, or first inning or second inning of a long running copper bull market, I want exposure to these types of projects in good places. So I'm just speaking for myself. I'm not telling or recommending anyone to do anything. But if anyone were to purchase shares in either of these, they are trading sympathetically right now. So Serengeti is the acquirer of Sun Metals. So Serengeti's share price dictates effectively what Sun Metals' share price is. Okay, so Sun Metals should trade at 0.43 times what Serengeti's share price is trading at. If there is a disconnect in between that and some value gap opens up in the form of an ARB opportunity, then that might be interesting.
okay. And then always valuation. Comment on how you think you trade relative to other copper gold development plays in premier first world jurisdictions.
Well, look, we gotta get the deals closed and come out and start trading. I would say on a standalone basis today, both companies are trading at fairly depressed valuations relative to what they have.
Okay. With that, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. It's always a pleasure and a treat to hear from Mark personally in this format. And thank you everyone for sending in your questions. You can follow Sun Metals and Serengeti on Twitter and LinkedIn, usual places. Definitely link to Amvest Capital and amvestcapital.com/webinars. And with that, Mark, I guess I've given you opportunity for 2 closing statements already, but why don't you give us a third and we'll close.
I'm not sure I have anything else to say, Campbell. I think I appreciate everyone dialing in. Thank you very much, and feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.